People are drawing comparisons between how Trump supporters on Capitol Hill were treated by police and how many people at protests over the summer were treated by law enforcement, including the protest where tear gas and rubber bullets were used here in Huntsville on June 3rd. Our Kenesha Dees has insight from local leaders.
It took me back to for a brief moment to 9/11.
United Women of Color Huntsville Executive Director Angela Curry says she was surprised, however, still aware that something like the siege of the Capitol building by Trump supporters could happen. She just didn't know how.
I toss and turn because it's very upsetting.
4 people died at the riot, 1 was shot by police, and 3 suffered medical emergencies, including an Athens Trump supporter. Alabama NAACP State Conference President Bernard Simulton says the national group is in the process of issuing a statement on President Trump being removed from office after stoking the violence.
They may have just sent it to the members, but they sent out a statement calling for Trump to be impeached, and they're asking people to sign on to that.
I'm here at the Madison County Courthouse where the Confederate monument once stood, prompting protests from people 6 months ago. Local leaders say there's a difference in how protesters were handled on June 3rd here in Huntsville in comparison to the insurrection on Capitol Hill yesterday.
People literally were armed. They had bombs and things of that nature, destroying property. The same things that people feared here in Huntsville literally happened on the Capitol.
More of us would have been shot. We would have been shot on the spot.
Leaders say they were also hurt to see the Confederate flag in the Capitol. It's something that didn't happen before, even during the Civil War.
It's almost like bringing the Nazi symbol into a Jewish synagogue or something like that.
Leaders believe the root of the trouble, race relations.
It continues to raise its ugly head. We're going to have to address it. And so as long as we continue to ignore it, we'll continue to have issues like this.
Putting the Valley first, Kenesha Dees, WZDX News.